Hi, my name is Ian Leckie, and I will be doing my final project on powered subwoofers for vehicles. These run on a 12-volt direct current circuit. This is a powered subwoofer from Rockville. It is a low-profile subwoofer that is meant to fit under seats and under areas that don't give a lot of clearance. The main thing to remember when interpreting how these things work is that it runs off of direct current. Now, this means that the circuit is going to need a positive and a negative. In other words, it needs power and it needs to return that power back to the chassis or some type of metal surface. Now, on this unit specifically, there's 3 conductors over here on the back of the device that allow it to have 12 volts of power to and from the device. On top there's a ground. In the middle there's a remote wire which will allow it to know when to be on and when to be off. And then there's 12 volts of hot constant power. It is important to note that there are 2 RCA cables, of which will transport the audio that you are trying to play through your speaker. This is very important, as even with power, the speaker will not know what to play without these wires. Another thing to note is that there's a fuse. It is a 20 amp fuse that allows this to have overcurrent protection. Effectively, once all of those are connected, it will allow the speaker to fluctuate up and down based off of the input given by the RCA cables. The speaker itself uses a magnet that is found within this enclosement. It's located usually right at the bottom of the cone, and that will allow it to move up and down by energizing and de-energizing. The next step in the process was to route the wires to the interior of the vehicle where the sitting quarters are. That was done by routing it under the carpeting to the floor of the vehicle and forward towards the stereo and the battery on this vehicle. So as you can see, it routes through under the carpeting here and sends itself forward alongside the trim of the vehicle, under the carpeting, and up to the stereo behind the dash. It should also be noted that these wires will follow along the same path behind the dash and end up at the stereo and the front where the battery is located. Moving on to the front of the vehicle, it is important to realize that one side of the battery is positive and one side of the battery is negative. Here we see the battery terminals. These are where you're going to land your connectors for the 12-volt power system. So the 12-volt system starts up in the front. That's because we have the battery located up here and the onboard fuse box located as well. So we'll begin by opening the fuse box. There we can locate that we have a hot terminal that we'll be able to patch into that will be switched and not always constantly hot. One thing to remember when considering the physical properties of how this works is that the electrons flow from the negative battery terminal to the positive battery terminal, and that will apply for the electrons of our circuit as well. That means that on the back of our speaker here, the electrons are going to flow from the negative terminal, which would be our ground, to our positive terminal. Here is a closer look at the onboard fuse box, where we have tapped our hot wire into. This hot wire will then follow its path along down here and will meet up with the speaker all the way in the back of the vehicle. Now, this is not the only way to do this, but I have grounded out the negative conductor to the negative side of the battery, straight to the terminal. This is okay, and it is also okay to put it to a part of the chassis where there is exposed metal. These wires then travel up along the firewall with the other wiring harnesses of the vehicle. Behind the firewall here, we can see where they enter the vehicle. So that is from the outside of the vehicle and goes to the inside. It can now be noted that the wires go down alongside the trim of the vehicle again, as they were on the other side. And you can find them under the carpeting, shooting all the way towards the back of the vehicle where the subwoofer is located. Again, I'd like to note that the wires do shoot up under the carpet to the trunk of the vehicle where the speaker is located. It should now be noted that these wires receive their input from this stereo, and in order to provide that input, you must connect it to the stereo via the supplied wires that I mentioned earlier. The speaker only gets input from this stereo here. This stereo is solely responsible for providing sound to the speaker. After connecting the RCA cables to the stereo itself, the speaker will have inputs from the stereo. A small thing to add is that the black remote wire we installed earlier allows us to remotely change the volume of the speaker itself. This concludes my presentation on vehicle subwoofers and how they work.